Welcome to Skirts and Science Presents. My name is Megan Trekkie, and I'm a museum technician here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and I'm here today with Patricia Reynolds, who is a retired wildlife biologist. So Patricia, what exactly does a wildlife biologist do?
A wildlife biologist is an individual that studies animals in the wild to determine where they live, what kinds of habitats they live in, what kind of populations they live in, whether the populations are going up and down, and to understand whether or not these animals are surviving well. I've been working in the Arctic for about the last 40 years, and I'm very interested in Arctic mammals, animals that are adapted to Arctic conditions. And one of the species that I spent a lot of time working on is this animal we see behind us, which is the muskox. And many people don't know what a muskox is unless they've seen it in their alphabet books, but
yeah.
It's an animal that's actually closely related to sheep and goats.
Would the wolves be this close to the muskoxen?
Well, I think the muskoxen would be running by that particular time. Or as you can tell, as you can see from the diorama, they form a circle or a group when they're disturbed by a predator or other things, but they're not really circling around, they're actually trying to get their rear end against another animal's rear to protect their hind legs.
So they don't form a circle around the predator, they form a circle
around
with themselves?
With themselves. It's called a defensive formation.
Okay.
They'll run together and then they form a group just because as each one is trying to push against the other one, it forms a circle, or sometimes just like a crescent shape.
Okay.
So they're not actually running into a circle with the predators around. And then the predators will test them, like these wolves are running up, and they'll see the center animal, like this animal here, it's got its horns down, and they have their vulnerable hind legs, which can be attacked easily, protected in the middle of this group of other animals, and they have those very sharp horns outward, where if a predator comes up, they can try to hook them with those horns, and they do that.
So in a fight between the wolf and the muskox is most likely going to win because of the group.
If they stay in a group, but what happens is when they're pushed, the group will run. And unlike a lot of animals, they'll run shoulder to shoulder, very tight. The group will run as a group. Okay. Whereas you see caribou or other sheep running, they'll run separately. Yeah. So it's quite a good technique, but not infallible. Grizzly bears turned out to be a more significant predator than wolves. In Alaska, northern Alaska, the muskoxen are actually preyed upon more by grizzly bear. We put satellite collars on grizzly bears because grizzly bears were preying on these muskoxen, and we wanted to know sort of predation rates. And by using satellite collars, you can follow the animals not only in the field by radio tracking them, which I would do, but also every day I could pull them up on my computer and see where they were going on a day-to-day basis. And that's been a new tool that's been very useful to follow animals, and many wildlife biologists today are using those techniques to follow animals that are difficult, or in places that are difficult to get to, or you can't fly, or the weather's bad. In conjunction with that, we took samples of blood from bears that over the years, and we took all those samples and used them to look at stable isotope work. We looked at what kinds of foods these animals are eating based on their blood samples over a period of about 30 years, and it was interesting to see that these animals are actually in the Arctic eating a lot of vegetation as opposed to meat. They don't have, and we discovered they had no access to fish or salmon that many bears in Alaska have. And so they are small, that takes them a long time to reproduce. They often don't have cubs till they're 5 or 6, and they keep those cubs for 2 or 3 years, so their reproductive rates are really low. So it's been a really interesting study to try to understand the relationship between the predators and the prey in the Arctic. And you must have found some interesting things with the collections in the museum.
I have. One of the things I was doing initially was going through drawers and just kind of ground truthing everything. Making sure it was in our database, everything was correct, that we had everything accounted for. I had a gigantic drawer of rabbits out, and I was going through them, and I looked at one that I had already done. It caught my eye, and I was like, what is with its ears? And so I took a closer look, and I had only seen this one other time at the collections at the Smithsonian, but it had warts growing out of its head.
Really?
Yeah, so I took a closer look, and it had 2 right next to its ears, had one coming out of its nose and one coming out of its chin, and it was what we think it was a rabbit with the Shoat papillomavirus, which
really?
causes warty growths mainly on the head of rabbits. And
really?
yeah, so it's where we think the legend of the jackalope comes from.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
I've seen those stuffed jackalopes in gas stations in Wyoming.
Yep, no,
but these
they're
little,
not actual horns.
No, these little mule deer horns sticking out of the rabbit's head.
I was working in the prep lab today, and we actually had another rabbit that we think had two little ones. They were really short. They were only like, you know, a centimeter long each, one on the cheek and one on the chin.
I think the importance of museum collections is underestimated. We've had many students who, you know, start working in the field and then they go to the museum where they have a substantial collection. For example, one person was working on a study of wolf mortality, and so he thought these animals were maybe dying from moose injuries, and so he went and looked at the big collection and found a certain percentage had hoof marks on their heads, and so he could tell that actually quite a few of these animals that were in the collection had probably been killed by moose.
That would be awesome.
And it'd be a long time before he'd be able to see that. You know, he might see it once, but he wouldn't see it as many times as he could see it in the museum collection itself.
Yeah, just
so
lining them
lining it out and saying, oh, they actually are getting kicked in the head by the moose. So it's a wonderful mix of these two things together, and they're really important for each other. People need to understand how important it is to have these collections of animals and then keep adding to them over time so that we can see how changes have occurred or how much variability there is in animals. We've been very lucky to get into science and see wonderful things in the directions you can go with science.
Yeah, definitely.
It's been so much fun.
Yes.
And will continue to be as well.
It will definitely continue to be. I'm Megan.
And I'm Patricia.
And this has been a Skirts and Science Presents Conversation.
Thank you for joining us.